Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special session. I'm very pleased to be sharing with you all a very interesting topic around how to become more memorable, particularly on the virtual sessions that you're going to be running. Now, this session is scheduled and structured for predominantly sales individuals, but I do know that we have some non-sales guests joining us today, and welcome. I will make sure that I structure or at least include any examples that may be relevant for you. But do know that this session, although for sales, is actually relevant for anyone that's providing any virtual presentations and that they have to influence anyone online. So this will be packed full of valuable insights. We have a lot to go through today, so I will make sure that I am cognizant of the amount of information that's being shared. Please do take notes. There's also a chat button open for you guys, and I would like you to ask any questions as we go through this session. There will be some time dedicated at the end for any questions, Q&A sessions, and even if we don't get to all the questions that you have, I will make sure that I answer them all and send them out as an email to everyone. So welcome again. Very pleased to get on and share with some of this information with you. So just before we start, there is a poll that I would love to ask all of you, and a question here. So the poll is really around understanding how you are with presentations at the moment and what have you done to adapt that. So I'm just going to launch this poll because I think this information is going to be very interesting for people to understand. So if you could just answer this one simple question. I'm about to launch that question now, and you should see it. I'm going to give a few seconds, about 10 or 15 seconds for people to answer that, and then we'll share some of those results. Okay, that's very interesting. So what we see from the information here is that 57% of you have said that you have adapted or changed your presentations for virtual presentations a little. 29% have not, and only 14% have changed a lot of their presentation to suit the virtual world. So this is very interesting. And actually, when we conducted this webinar, and I conducted a private webinar like this for just our clients, very early on in this whole pandemic situation, actually the answers were predominantly in the no. So I think people have started to realize that they need to adapt those presentations, particularly for virtual discussions. And actually that's completely different to live sessions. So thank you for answering those questions. And what you will see, what you will attain from this information today is the goal is for you to have at least 10 new things that you can take away and start to use immediately. That is the goal for this. So please take copious amounts of notes. There's a lot of information here to share. So if I just briefly share those results so that you can see them, you will see that a majority of you have said that you've done a little. And that's fine, because sometimes not a lot has to be done. It's actually a lot of that to do with actually how we convey that information. But you will get a ton of information here today. So let's begin. Why is this such an important topic to be discussed? Well, studies have shown that, and this is a Microsoft study, where we actually have shorter attention spans than goldfish. Now, this is not to say that we've become less intelligent as a species. That's not the case. Actually, this study was conducted to understand how multiple screens can affect our attention span. And in the virtual world, when you're doing video calls, this is absolutely relevant, because the level of distraction that you will experience from people online, particularly buyers, is hugely increased. When you think about emails popping up and notifications, the project, the open tab on the project that they've been working on, Facebook, LinkedIn, all these things that can be a distraction actually will become a challenge for salespeople now. And in fact, we've seen a lot of that happening from all the interviews that we have done. So this is really important to understand. It's not just about increasing memory, it's about how do we command more of our buyers' attention while presenting to them. And attention leads to memory. Just to give you an idea, 7%, according to a survey done in the UK and the USA, 7% of people forget their own birthday from time to time. So as salespeople, we take a lot of pride in our skills, in our presentations, and we kind of expect our buyers to remember a lot of what we talk about. But actually, that's not the case. In fact, the research shows that between 70 and 80%, or sorry, 70 and 90%, of what is presented is forgotten within 2 days. And if you think about 390 million people in the UK and US, that comes to about 27,300,000 people that forget their own birthday from time to time. So our presentations really don't stand a chance if that many people forget their own birthday. So it's worth remembering that we have to do a lot of work, and there's a lot of effort on our side to improve how our buyers actually remember the information that we share with them. And then the final thing is an interesting information here, which is almost 60% of senior buyers, senior executive buyers, so these are VPs and above, would prefer to view video in presentations compared with texts. And if they had the choice of both, they would prefer video. And that's very important because clearly video is of higher interest for them. Interest leads to attention, and attention leads to memory. So you may want to think about incorporating video within some of your presentations, or even at the very beginning of the sales process, where you are sending out maybe a cold email or an introduction email. You may want to include a short video clip, as that will probably command more attention from your buyers. So what I would love is in this presentation, there are 4 things that, if anything, I would like you to take away from this discussion. If you take away these 4 things in this webinar, I can guarantee that you will have a much more impact in your online presentations. So the first one is emotional impact. Emotions are the juice of life, and we make our decisions based on emotions. And I will discuss certain levels around how do you identify what emotion or emotional state your buyers are going through at the moment. I will give you some techniques on how to change that emotional state, and also how that's going to impact their memory and attention. Consistent engagement, incredibly important when you are selling or presenting virtually. You cannot command the same presence as you would in a live meeting or a face-to-face meeting. So how you consistently engage your buyers while you're talking to them online becomes critically important. The third one is easy on the brain. And I will go into share some stats about why our brain is actually very lazy, and focus and attention is very energy intensive. So our brain is designed to really, utilize as little energy as possible to get the most benefit as possible. So we will start to show to you how do you make your presentations as easy as possible for your buyers to be able to maintain their attention and therefore remember what you're saying. And then mindset. Very little of this is done with sales training. However, it's one of the most powerful techniques that you can do as a seller. And most of the time, the difference between one presentation from the other is not really increased knowledge or skill. It has a lot to do with your mindset and psychology before every engagement. So I'll show you a very interesting and very powerful exercise that we'll go through together on how you can start to actually change and adapt your mindset so that you can present the best version of yourself in every meeting that you're conducting. So let's begin with emotional impact. As I said, emotions give meaning. And the way that you share emotions, the way that you understand the emotions that your clients are going through or that your buyers are going through online becomes incredibly important. In fact, buyers may only remember 10% of your words, right? This is very important because we talked about, and I mentioned 70 to 90% of what you discuss or share is forgotten within 2 days. Buyers will only remember maybe 10% of your words 2 days later. However, they will remember 100% of how you made them feel in that presentation. One of the areas you want to focus on, and what we will cover, is how do you make sure that they remember feeling great? They remember feeling good things from your presentation, and there was a good and positive vibe from the information that you have shared with them. And one of the basic concepts here that has to be discussed and addressed is this misconception that perception equals reality. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and I'll explain why. It's not perception, it's actually emotions. Emotions equal reality, and therefore our behaviors and the actions that we take. And there's a reason for this. When neuroscientists look at how the central nervous system and your brain interacts with the environment around you, there are kind of 5 levels. Now, number 1 is the sensory. And these are things like measuring pressure, heat, light, shapes, touch, taste, smell. These are things that are constantly running in the background. In fact, actually, did you know that the sensory receptors in the skin have the ability to detect a drop or a change in temperature by just 0.5 degrees Celsius? However, the brain doesn't need to recognize that. In fact, that's not critical for survival. However, your sensory systems have the ability to do so. So what then happens is perception is involved. Perception is where your brain, through a reticular activating system, decides and filters what is worthy of analysis. So if there's a sudden 5-degree drop in temperature, that may be worthy of analysis to indicate that the brain needs to take action in order to maybe survive. So what happens when that perception comes through, and this is why perception doesn't equal reality, it's emotions, because the next stage are the emotions. How do we feel about what we've just allowed through for the brain to analyze? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it even indifferent? And those feelings then generate thoughts, right? And this is why more than 90% of our thoughts or our decisions about something is based upon the emotions that we attach to it. We like to think that we're logical creatures, but the reality is that we're not. So a lot of our decisions are not. So what are the emotions behind some of those thoughts and decisions that we're taking? And then those thoughts lead to actions and behavior. Okay, and we'll talk about how you can start to adapt the emotional cues that you're giving, so that you are giving the right level of thought to your buyers, and therefore they're acting or behaving in a way that's conducive to your sales process. So how do you start to identify some of those emotional triggers, or at least those emotional feelings that your buyers are going through? And there are 3 main ways that I'm about to show you. One of which is listening. It sounds very obvious, but in the heat of the moment, in the heat of battle almost, when you are selling or presenting, you're focused more on your presentation. You're focused more on things like, am I sounding right? Am I saying the right things? I don't want to forget certain things, right? So you're thinking about all of that, but your attention's far less on what it is that your buyer is actually saying to you. So we miss a lot of the direct sharing of direct emotional cues that they're feeling just by not listening, because we're so focused on making ourselves look good. So really, and this is more than active listening, this is about deep listening. This is about not just hearing the words, but hearing the tone of voice, understanding what are they say, what can I read between the lines, and what are they not saying. So that's the verbal cue, but there are two non-verbal cues that probably make up the majority of how someone is communicating. And that second one is body language. What is the body language of that person that you're presenting to? Are they slouching? Are they sitting up straight? Do they seem more engaged? So we tend to not notice this, at least not consciously, but I guarantee you that subconsciously, you're aware that something may be wrong. And the aim of today is just to make that a little bit more conscious so that you then recognize them and then have the tools in order to do something about it. The next one is eye movement, right? So do you find that people's eyes are moving to the left, to the right? Are they focused on you? Does it keep wandering? In which case, if it does, that's when you're going to start to use the techniques I'm about to show you. So Hilary Rowan talks about body language and the question of body language when you see the shoulders and the head. So when you see shoulders and head, we're going to go through an exercise, but what you will find is that when you're in a slightly depressed mood, for example, or maybe if you're feeling bored, the shoulders tend to hunch a little bit more forward. However, if someone's feeling a bit more confident, you notice the shoulders are raised and more level and almost arching towards your back. So you will start to, and we'll cover that in more detail, you will start to see some of those things and you will notice that during a presentation. However, eye movement is very important here. For example, another one is clenching of the jaws, right? That may indicate that someone might be tense or anxious about something. But eye movement happens to be one of the most important when it comes to video calls. If you notice that they're moving, if they're not focusing straight at you, it may be an indication that they are distracted. So what can we do to, if we notice those distractions, and if we notice someone is maybe feeling anxious or bored or annoyed about something we're discussing, what can we do to change that emotional state? So the first one, and it's the simplest, but also one of the most powerful, is smile. As we sometimes forget because we're so busy doing a very serious presentation, especially in the B2B world, that we forget to smile. And smiling is incredibly powerful for a few reasons. Number one, research has shown, and neuroscientists know this very clearly now, smiling releases a soup of neurotransmitters, good feeling neurotransmitters, from serotonin to dopamine to endorphins. And what that does is that dramatically lowers your heart rate and your blood pressure. And when that happens, you feel more relaxed. In fact, you're able to breathe better, and you're able to then be able to articulate your words much more clearly. So smiling is powerful for you as the presenter, but it's also powerful for the buyer, the person that you're talking to on the video call. Research and experiments have shown that just smiling to someone, and if it's done, if you smile with your whole body and your eyes, it becomes almost infectious. People love to see that, and they find themselves smiling in return. And even if they don't smile, research and studies have shown that it actually drops their heart rate and blood pressure as well. So in any case, you're producing a cue to help them relax. In fact, there was a particular study done I can't recall where in America, but it was a hospital for mentally depressed patients. And they were asked for 2 weeks, every morning for 5 minutes, to smile whilst looking in the mirror. Even if they didn't feel like smiling, they were asked to just go through the motions and conduct the physical act of smiling. After 2 weeks, 70% of those patients shared that they felt a marked improvement marked positivity in how they viewed themselves, the world around them, and their place in that world. There was a very big reversal of the depression that they felt, and that's astounding when you think that all they had to do was just smile for 5 minutes, in the morning and look at themselves smiling in the mirror. So smiling has a very powerful effect on the people that you're talking to. The next one is asking thought-provoking questions. And we'll come on to this in more detail in the next section, which is around consistent engagement. But you want to make sure that you are asking questions that will state shift the emotional state that that person's in. And if it's thought-provoking enough, you will snap their attention back to what you're asking, and therefore the presentation that you're giving. The next one is particularly valuable for sellers, and unfortunately, we're still trained as salespeople to leverage negative consequences and to reinforce those negative consequences as a lever to induce someone to buy. We now know that our brains are not designed to do that. So it's designed to move towards reward, but it's also designed that when it notices something that induces fear or some sort of negative consequences, it's designed to stay still. Most people, to get your body to stay still. And if you think about it in evolutionary terms, if you heard a rustling in the trees behind you, you wouldn't know if that's prey or friend or foe. And what you would do is you would stay still and wait for more information before you make a decision. Most people think it's fight or flight, but actually that's very energy taxing for the body. And in those days, when you had to forage or hunt and use a lot of energy to gain food, your brain does not want you to lose that energy unnecessarily. So I'm not saying don't use negative consequences in your sales pitches. They should be used at the very beginning to gain attention. But if you want to induce someone or convince someone to buy, you need to start using positive cues, positive impact or consequences. Start to talk about positive benefits to induce someone to take an action. Information, so new and interesting information is another very powerful technique to use to gain someone's attention. Research through EEG, so electroencephalogram studies, have found that the centers of the brain that light up when you give someone new and interesting information is exactly the same as if they've just eaten sugar. So your brain considers new information so important that it rewards you for receiving that new information and entices you to go and seek out more new information. And this is very key because the brain is designed to acquire new and interesting information for its very survival. So using information such as insights. Insight selling became a very big thing from the Challenger Sale book, which was published in 2011. And they found in their research that leading with insights gains the buyer's attention much, much higher than any other technique. For example, confirming their business or their strategy or their goals. That to them is mundane because they live and breathe it. But if you give them interesting insights, that will command their attention, and therefore they will find you far more memorable. So the framework that I use for this is the word use insights. So for an insight to be powerful, it has to be unique, right? So your brain is designed that if you give it information it already knows, it kind of filters it out. So unique information. You want to use something that is a state shift, that commands more of a state shift. So it has to shake their very foundation in terms of the things that they believe. So it has to be, it can't be something that, although it's unique, is not that interesting to them. It's got to be something that makes them think, oh, whoa, I didn't even realize that. Or actually, that actually changes the way I view my business or my wealth. And the final one is evocative. It's got to generate, it doesn't need to be, and you don't need to antagonize anyone or in any way, but it needs to be evocative. It's got to be evocative enough that it generates dialogue. And if it generates dialogue, you have that person's attention. Even if they disagree with what you say, that gives you now the opening to actually confirm why that piece of insight is actually correct. And they will be listening out for your answer. So leading with insight as a salesperson is very, very powerful, and the brain is rewarded for receiving such information. The next is vary your pitch and tone. So studies have shown that your brain maintains its focus a lot more and is activated, more centers of the brain are activated when you vary your pitch and tone. So if you have something very important, very powerful, right, very unique to say, you want to raise your tone in such a way. But if you have something really, really valuable, something that's not really known very much, almost secretive, you might want to lower your pitch a little bit. In fact, studies have shown that the pitch that I'm using right now has been found to activate the brain far more than a loud pitch. And if you think about it, when you were younger, or even recently, if someone said that they had a secret to tell you, and they use this type of pitch, have you ever noticed that your body involuntarily moves forward in order to almost hear it? It's very powerful. So varying your pitch and tone will keep the brain engaged and keep your buyers engaged. Ask sincerely, right? So this is another technique that's incredibly powerful. And by the way, all these techniques that I'm showing you, you don't need to incorporate every single, and the aim of the game is not to incorporate every single one of them in your presentations. You need to decide the context in terms of the person that you're speaking with, the setting, topic that you're discussing. But but the idea is that you can actually use this as a toolbox to use specific ones as and when it seems right. So asking with sincerity. So I've used this, and I've seen some of the best salespeople use this. When you notice that someone may be anxious, bored, maybe in disagreement, call it out and ask with sincerity. Just say, Susan, can we just pause the presentation for a second? I noticed that you seem a bit distracted. Is everything okay? Is there something that I'm doing that's causing that? And if you just ask with sincerity, that does two things. Number one, it wakes them up, right? So they realize that something is going on, or that you truly are aware of what's going on, and they will answer your question. The second thing is that the level of trust or the level of connection that you have now established with that buyer dramatically increases. And in fact, even if they answer and say, no, nothing's wrong with the sort, you will notice that their attention is now far more focused on you than anything that may have distracted them before you asked that question. Injecting surprise. So this is one that you have to be quite careful with. So sometimes just a clap of the hands may work. Now in a B2B sales environment, and that may not be the best technique to use. But for example, I've seen, and I've used this myself, where you use environmental cues that are completely different to what you're discussing, but it induces the buyer to change and kind of come out of the state that they were currently in. So for example, you want to select things that are quite connected to the topic that you sell or the solution that you're selling. So for example, I have a client that sells HR-related software. And this software is designed specifically to help companies log project managers' time, especially those of consultants for their clients in real time, and then be able to, in real time, share those analytics with their clients. And you can use the example of, if you notice someone wearing a particularly nice watch, you can stop your presentation, just suddenly shift to asking that person about the watch. And if when they respond, you can then connect that back to almost saying, well, look, like how easy it is for you to lift up your wrist and check the time, it's that easy for you as a buyer, so for you as a client, to be able to get your clients to then see the information that we have around the project leaders who are working for you and how much time they've spent and how you easily be able to see those analytics. So you want to use certain cues that are around your buyer, maybe a picture frame, a picture that's behind them, etc. You can use that because it creates a state shift that will wake them up from any lethargy, or if they're distracted in any way, you will bring their focus back to what you're discussing. If you have something important to say that it's important. So a client of mine, when we work through one of their cases and one of their presentations, you can say, for example, let's use an example here. Stephen, this slide is incredibly important. In fact, 80% of our clients, when we ask them what was it that made them buy and made them loyal to our products, they said that 95% of the reason why is because of what I'm about to share with you on this. So if you take nothing away from this presentation, I hope it is just this slide and what I'm about to share with you, because it's so critical. So just saying that will bring someone's attention or focus back to what you're discussing, or at least increase it. We all have heroes that we admire. And in terms of evolution and the tribe and the society that we lived in tens of thousands of years ago, that determined our very survival. Right? When we looked at the strongest in the pack, we wanted to emulate them and copy them in order to then increase our survival rate. And our brain sees these heroes in the same way. And some of my clients I've noticed have done this very effectively, and non-clients. Try to incorporate quotes or sayings from heroes that you believe your buyers would look up to, or or admire. Try to use those quotes in your presentation as long as they are connected with what you do. If one of them happens to be a client or happens to say something about your brand, fantastic. But if you're in the finance world, for example, and it's a safe bet that the person you're speaking with will admire Warren Buffett, you might want to use one of his quotes that's related to the benefits of your solution. Speaking to the personalities, right? So there's a study that was conducted by behavioral psychologists Merrill and Reed, and it's quite a well-known study. However, in the heat of the moment in presentations, we often forget to use it. And if we're not speaking the language, or at least the social style of the person, of the buyer, then you're speaking a language that they just won't understand, and they will filter out what you're saying. So we haven't, this is a topic in itself that takes a lot of time to discuss, but I'm going to briefly go through what they are. So you have drivers, right? So drivers are individuals who are all about efficiency. They're goal-orientated individuals. They want to see results as fast as possible. So when you're discussing some of your solutions and presentations, be cognizant that if you're speaking to a driver, you want to talk in that kind of language. Expressives, they are mostly about their own image in the world. So do they look good? Does your solution make them look good? They like to be center of attention. They're very gregarious or social individuals. Then you have the analytical, right? Analyticals are people who they relish facts, data, evidence. They take time in making their decisions, and they only make those decisions once they have all the facts together. So pushing someone like an analytical to make a decision in a sales presentation may not be in your favor, right? And you may not want to go down that route. And then you have amiable. Amiables are those who are very socially conscious. They love working in a team or in a group. In fact, amiables are found that if you have a buyer who's amiable, they won't switch vendors out of loyalty to their existing vendor, even if it's very clear that what you offer is far superior than what they currently have, because they don't like confrontation. In fact, for them, it's one of their biggest turn-offs. They hate it. So again, if you're forcing an amiable to change their vendor, it may not be in your favor. But if you notice that you are speaking with them, you should be cognizant of how you're going to make them feel safe, and actually it'll be less confrontational for them to do so. So what does this all have to do with sales? And actually there are stats that show that when you consider and sell to the emotional value of the person, or the personal value, that this actually increases sales. A study done by CB, which is now part of Gartner, studied 3,000 B2B buyers from a range of industries. And what they found was truly astonishing. 71% of those B2B buyers who saw personal value as well as business value were more likely to buy your service or your solution. The second piece of stat, and there was several pieces of stat, but I've only selected two here. Almost 70% of those buyers who saw personal value as well as business value will pay a higher price, compared to only 8.5% that only saw personal value, that only saw business value. And that's astounding, because when you think about how much training there is out there around negotiation tactics, like the icon model, trade-off discussions, etc. Actually, you find that if you just incorporated personal value to your buyers, you're going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to negotiation. So don't just think about the business value. It's very important, don't get me wrong, but without the personal value, as I said, most of our decisions are made through emotional reasons, not logical reasons. So if you're not incorporating personal value, you're missing a whole big area around being able to provide them with the right information for them to make the right decision. And that will grab their attention if you use that. That will make what you say far more memorable than just business value and logic, because we are in the business world, there is a whole plethora of business value. They hear it all the time. But if they can emotionally connect and engage with what you're showing them and what you're discussing with them, they will remember it. Remember, they remember 100% of how you made them feel, as opposed to just 10% of the information you share. So there are several frameworks that you can use to align what you sell and what you offer to someone's emotional value or their human needs. So there's Maslow's hierarchy, there are the 6 human needs. This section takes dedicated half a day to one of my training courses, because it's quite complex and it requires a lot of practice. But you can use whatever works for you. But and after you give your business value, you've got to find a way to link this to personal value. Otherwise, they will not see the real benefits, and you are not helping them enhance the way they see themselves in the world that they live. So that's emotional value. Okay, so that's the emotional impact of what your presentation is giving. Emotions, as I said, is very important to maintaining someone's attention. So the next stage is consistent engagement. Okay, and this is going to be this is critical to how you actually conduct your sales discussions online, or even give any presentations through virtual calls. The first thing you need to do is to set targets. So as you noticed at the beginning of this presentation, my target was that you all leave this session having 10 new things that you can take to your next presentation. Or at least you've learned 10 new techniques that you can then decide which ones you use for your presentation. It's the same for your sales calls, right? You want to establish a target, or at least a goal, with your buyer at the beginning of your session, and one that's agreeable by them as well, right? So they may have slightly different intentions or expectations from the discussion, in which case that's fine. Agree on what those should be for both. We talked about thought-provoking questions, and I promised that I'll discuss this a lot further. And here it is. We all have training as salespeople that we've got to ask the good questions. However, there is an art to it. And again, this is a whole training session on its own. But there's a reason why asking thought-provoking questions commands attention and therefore memory. There is a misconception that we as humans are able to multitask. Actually, neuroscience has now found this is absolutely not true. Your brain is incapable of focusing on more than one thing at a time. Questions enable you as the seller to direct the buyer's focus. So if you ask a powerful enough question, you will shift them out of any distraction, and you will get them to focus on the answer to your question. So think about the types of questions that you're going to be asking your buyers. Have some questions planned for if you notice that maybe their attention has waned a little. Have some questions that induce them to then not only respond to you, but to give their thoughts and their experiences to it as well. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're interesting to your buyers. Okay, interest will lead to attention, and attention will lead to that. So if you're not even interested or discussing anything of interest for them, then it doesn't matter how great the information you're sharing or how powerful the insight. It just won't resonate with them whatsoever. Another technique is co-creation. So studies have found that if you get your buyer to co-create the presentation with you, right? Not before the presentation, obviously in preparation, I'm talking about during that presentation. If they're co-creating the answers and filling in blanks, for example, their attention level is incredibly high. And in fact, they will remember your presentation far more than anyone else's. And just out of interest, it'll be great to see here in the spirit of co-creation. Can anyone think of what the word is for that blank statement here? So, and it's just to give you a clue, it rhymes with co-creation. So co-creation prevents what? Can anyone hazard a guess? So the word is elimination. So co-creation prevents elimination. So if you can co-create with your buyers, you will be able to increase the chances of them remembering what you're presenting. So an analogy that one of my, years ago, one of my earlier sales directors helped us with understanding how important asking questions are, is the analogy of walking down the dark tunnel and only you know the way out, and it's your job to make sure that you lead the buyer there. And if you're walking down a dark tunnel, you don't want to walk down the tunnel with the expectation that your buyer is following you. And once you get out, only to turn around and find that the buyer's not with you and he or she's lost. So questions, and engaging questions especially, are very powerful in making sure that the buyer is mentally with you as you're going down the sales journey. And these can be questions like, Stephen, does that make sense? And if they say yes, one of the last things you don't want to leave it there. You don't want to just assume that that person's answering yes because they truly do understand what you're going through. You want to ask a more provocative question, which is, okay, that's great to hear. Tell me what elements of what I've described so far kind of resonates with you the most. Which one's most relevant for you in your business? So get them to share with you their experiences, because the brain remembers through experiences. It remembers those emotions based upon past experiences because it needs some form of context. So think about when you're giving your presentation, set points at which you're going to be asking questions to make sure that you're reaching out with your hand to see that they're still. So that is consistent engagement. So we've gone through two of them right now, right? And now it's time to look at how to make your presentations easy on the brain. So here's a statement that's quite provocative. Your brain doesn't want you to be happy. In fact, it's not designed to make you happy. It's designed to help you survive. And your brain is using as little energy as possible because it wants to continuously scan for any danger signals in order to help you then survive. So, for example, to give you some stats here, your brain probably makes up about 7%, maybe less, of your body weight. However, in a healthy adult, your brain utilizes over 30% of the body's energy, total energy consumption. That's a huge amount considering the size of the brain compared to the rest of your body. So that level of consumption can be very taxing for the brain. And if it's focusing on one thing for too long a period, that is anathema to the brain, because it's now thinking, hang on, what am I missing in my environment that could be potentially dangerous? So if you're presenting with overly complex presentations with too many words on there, the brain is designed to zone that out, and you've now increased the chances of distraction. So one technique to use is rhyme. Rhyming And we've grown up with this in our own different cultures. Rhyming is used for us to remember key things, right? So in songs, in statements, in cautionary tales. So think about maybe what kind of phrases you can use or sentences you can use that are rhyming sentences that could help describe what you're presenting and make it more memorable. Pictures are incredibly important. Your brain doesn't remember things. It doesn't remember words. It remembers symbols, pictures, imagery. Because then what it does is when it sees a picture, it immediately tries to reconcile that image based upon anything in its past experience or memory that is similar to it. It may not be exactly the same, but the moment we see something, our brain just says, okay, what is this similar to, and how did that make me feel? So try to use powerful imagery that's relevant as well as familiar to the buyer, so that they can then connect that to a good feeling. Acronyms and acrostics. This is not used very frequently by sellers, but it should do, because it is a powerful way of helping your buyers remember something. So acronyms such as the framework that I'm using here. So in one of my training programs, where you want to where you want to elicit high levels of engagement in your buyers, we have a framework called the JOLT framework. So JOLT is by the use of the insights. So how powerful is that insight, where it literally shakes the emotional state of the person that you're talking to and induces them to kind of focus their full attention on? How do you use questions to understand their world and how they view the performance levels of their world and how they may view your solutions? Learn by understanding what their emotional states and how they feel about making those changes, and what emotions do they go through, and learn about the buying process, for example. And then target, which is how do we then start to talk about those human needs, and what human needs are we satisfying as part of our solution that should induce them to buy. So that could be an example of an acronym, or at least a framework that you can use. So think about any frameworks that you can, think about any frameworks you can create for some of the information that you're sharing. The other one is your brain is designed to notice things that are out of place, because out of place means potential threat or danger. So things like visual salience. I mean, salience is about environmental cues or environmental objects that your brain subjectively analyzes and translates as something that is out of place. So there are a few types of visual saliences out there. So the one which you're seeing in front of you are different shapes. So anything that is out of place in terms of a shape or a look is easily noticed by the brain. Contrasting colors, right? So the color red has been found to has been associated with increased memory. So if you write something in red, you're 30%, I think the exact number is 32% more likely to remember it. Now, that's because red is almost universally seen as the color of danger. But it's also why when you look at retail shops, the word sale is often in red. It's because it attracts your eye's attention to it. So use the color red when appropriate. However, it's not just about the color itself, it's the contrasting color. If you have a busy slide like the one I'm showing you, you may want to gray out some of the less important areas and put in color the areas that you really want people to remember and draw their eyes to. Gray, incidentally, has been found to be the color of monotony. It's almost the color that your brain phases out because it recognizes gray as not that important. So contrasting colors is another way of making sure that you're drawing the attention to something that is important and helping make sure that that's remembered. Orientation is another one. Okay, so if something is pointing one way and then one is another, that is easily noticeable. And the best way that I've seen that is when you see a crowd of people moving towards a goal, but someone else is moving the other way, and that goal happens to be far more attractive than the other. It's just that person. So there are some creative ways of being able to to use this particular savings. And then there's spatial cues. And spatial cues would be things like circles and arrows. And you saw this in one of my previous slides around body language, where I used arrows for you to be able to clearly notice the different body languages between someone who was slouching and someone who was sitting upright and could be more attentive. So use those spatial cues as well as a technique to actually increase attention and memory. The final thing about making it easy on your brain is, as I said, focus and attention is energy taxing to your brain. It cannot sustain it for long. And in fact, it doesn't want to sustain it for long because it wants to maintain its more subconscious sensing for survival. So you want to give your buyers some way of giving their higher level thinking processes in their brain some rest. So just like the body, the brain needs rest. Now, I want to ask, and I want to see if anyone's able to notice this. I've been using this technique throughout this presentation at certain points. Can anyone hazard a guess as to what types of image or activity is hugely relaxing to the brain? Can anyone guess what that might have been and what I might have used? Okay. So we got certain colors. That's possible, although certain colors, as I said, actually attracts the attention. So if anything, that will actually be even more taxing for the brain. Shapes was also mentioned by one of you. Shapes, no. So shapes again is something that draws the attention. In fact, if you're using contrasting shapes, as I showed before, again, that actually focuses your brain on something in particular. So actually what I've been using is nature. So studies have shown and proven, and actually there's a term in terms of the geometric sequencing that nature has that actually filters through your eye into your retina and informs your brain to switch from higher level learning to slower subconscious activity. And when that happens, your brain is given your high level, the higher thinking parts of your brain are given a chance to recuperate in terms of energy so that it can then go into focus when it's needed. So going out for a walk in nature is found to be hugely powerful. Now, you're probably thinking, well, how the hell can I ask our buyers to go for a walk in the middle of a presentation? So studies have found that even having a picture of nature has exactly the same impact. So just even a picture, and it needs to be a beautiful picture because it's got to be as real as possible. It's got to be appealing to the eyes. Even having that induces the brain to start to relax, and it gives it a chance to recuperate for the next session. So think about injecting such imagery before different sections of your presentation. So if you have 4 sections like I have, I've put in 4 different sections, 4 different images. And the reason why is because when you see such beauty, your brain automatically goes back to thinking, when was the last time that I experienced such beauty? How did I feel? And normally you feel good when you think about it. It may have been a beach, it may have been the forest, it may have been a trek or a hike. And what this does is it not only lowers the blood, your heart rate and your blood pressure, it also lowers your cortisol levels. And when that happens, your brain is now in a state of relaxation, and it's able to then regenerate and recuperate. So using imagery such as this is incredibly powerful. So the final stage is the mindset. Okay, and in this section, we're going to go through a very, very brief exercise that I'm going to take you through. And it's a powerful exercise that helps you present the best, present your best self in every meeting. For salespeople, and mindset encompasses quite a few things, but in sales, from our research around the world with hundreds and hundreds of sellers, and we looked at some of the best people in the world, what we found is that mindset has 5 specific components. And this is mindset before you go into every sales discussion. So the first thing to consider in terms of your mindset is language. Right? What are some of the words that you're using to describe the buyer that you're about to speak to, or the client? Right? So if you're speaking with a client and you're thinking, gosh, this client is always hard work, versus, this client is an absolute joy to work with, that language has very different meanings, and it has very different emotional reactions. So language is an important is one of the components, of your mindset paradigm. Focus is the other. So are you focusing on the fact that this person is tough to work with, or are you focusing on the fact that actually you delivered incredible value to that? And therefore you're focusing on how to articulate that in a way that will make them appreciative of your solution. So what is it that you're focusing on? Are you focusing on, for example, the lack of sleep that you had the previous night, or how tired you are? Or are you focused on how energized you are about being able to have this discussion as well? So focus is another paradigm, another component of the mindset paradigm. Belief in your product is the third one. So what are your beliefs about your product and solution? Do you believe strongly enough in it? In which case, does that come out, and so does that come across in your discussions? Or are you not so sure? Because if you're not so sure, believe it or not, buyers will pick up on that. There was a statistic that a statistic out there about buyers, and it found that the average B2B buyer has 12.3 times, not percentage, times more experience and knowledge on buying than the average seller has on selling. So believe me, if you're not sincere or genuine, if you don't believe in your product, that buyer will know, whether consciously or subconsciously. So what are your beliefs around your product and what you're presenting? And do you believe strongly enough? The next one is physiology. What is your body posture like? That's why we talked about body language, because it's not just about buyer's body language, it's about your own body language. So are you sitting up straight with your shoulders back, for example, and your head up high? And that allows more air to get through into your lungs, and you'll be able to project your words far more confidently, far more articulate. Or are you sitting down and hunched? In which case, are you feeling nervous? Is your throat tightening? Are you able? Does that now affect how you are projecting your voice? Okay. That has an impact on your mindset, because your body language can also, in some ways, determine the mindset that you're feeling. It can even create a vicious cycle. And then the final one is belief in yourself. Right. So, what are your beliefs about your own abilities? What are your beliefs about your standing and peerage to the person that you're speaking with? If this is a VP or a C-level person of a large company, do you feel self-worthy of being able to have this kind of discussion? Right? And often salespeople do not. So the exercise we're going to go through is a very quick one. So I want you to just think about the last time that you had a discussion with a buyer. And think about when you were about to have that discussion with them. What was the physiology that you went through? This is the one that we're going to go through today, because it takes too long to do all the others as well. These are very big topics. So what physiology did you have? Were you slightly nervous or slightly hunched? Or were you feeling very confident? And the type of stance that you have will determine how you feel. And one of the exercises we give to our clients is a series of exercises on training them on how to change that physiology before they go into the meeting, so that they're in a powerful state of being and they're able to present the best version of themselves going forward. So next time that you're about to go into a meeting, just observe what posture you currently have? Are you slightly hunched or are you sitting up? Are you far more engaged and do you feel like you're breathing more, or are you slightly tight on breath? Right? And when you notice that, change it and think about the last time when you felt unstoppable, when you felt incredibly confident, when you felt that you were on top of the world. What was your stance like then? How did you feel? And bring that image to mind as powerfully and as closely to you as possible, so that your body actually mimics that experience and you'll feel far more confident in your presentation. So what we're going to do, and just to kind of wrap up, there are 6 sales books here that I recommend every B2B seller should have read. And these show some of the principles that I've talked about, less so on the neuroscience side, but more so on the research behind sales influence, and mindset. And the one here at the bottom on Carol Dweck she's a neuroscientist, and it's become a very famous book. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. But I'm often asked, what are the kind of top books that I would recommend for sellers to read? And here are 6 here that I think you should absolutely go out and get a copy of. So hopefully I've shared with you the 4 things that I really want you to remember, right? If you conduct these 4 things, your presentation will become far more memorable. So think about the emotional impact. Think about how you can ask questions to consistently engage your buyer along the journey. Make sure your presentations are easy on the brain, and have a think about your mindset. Is it a mindset of confidence, or do you feel slightly nervous? In which case, think about the last time that you felt incredibly confident and put your body in that position so that you can present the best self into that meeting. So that is hopefully that has been useful and valuable for you all. Like every other presentation, you want to make sure that you have the right level of impact with your buyer, so that not only is it memorable, but it's memorable for the right reasons. We have a final poll that I would love for everyone to answer. It takes only a few seconds. It would hugely help if you can give feedback on the presentation that I gave you and how much it has impacted you, and if you've taken anything away from it that you would like to